Larry Johnson does it again. He is known for being an elite recruiter and an elite developer of talent. That combination helped Ohio State snag a young defensive lineman out of SEC country. Who is the player? How talented is he? We'll discuss all that today on Locked On Buckeye.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeye fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is a Friday, November 4th in the year 2022, and today's episode is brought to you by Underdog. Sign up on UnderdogFantasy.com with the promo code Locked On and get your first deposit doubled up to $100. On today's episode, John Garcia Jr. is back. John Garcia Jr. is the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated, and he is Locked On's football recruiting insider. John and I discussed the commitment of Kayden McDonald and why you will love him and the talent that he has on the football field. Also, who could be the next commitment at Ohio State, and how JT Tuimoloau's performance against Penn State impacts Buckeye recruiting. This is going to be one of two episodes today. The other one will come out around 3 p.m. Eastern time on the YouTube and on your favorite podcast audio listening app. It's going to be the questions, 3 questions I have going into Ohio State's game tomorrow against Northwestern. This is all about recruiting. This is with John Garcia Jr. This is with the one guest that gets the biggest and best reviews, and I'm glad John is back with us to discuss some amazing things going on the Ohio State football recruiting trail. And as we welcome in John Garcia Jr., he is the director of football recruiting at Sports Illustrated and Locked On's football recruiting insider. I'd like to thank LinkedIn Jobs for being the official college football recruiting sponsor across the Locked On College Network. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. I believe the last time we had John on the show, we discussed a big man who committed to Ohio State in Mr. Ian Moore. Today, it's another big man. Now, Ian Moore, it clocks in a few ticks shy of 300 pounds. This guy, Kayden McDonald, is clear and over the 300-pound mark. I've seen he weighs 310. John, I've seen he weighs 315. It doesn't matter. He's a big man in the middle. He's the most recent player to commit to Ohio State. This one in the class of 2023. What can you tell us about Kayden McDonald's game on the football field?
Really nice get here for Ohio State, right? I mean, we look at this defensive class. We love the DBs. The linebacker group looks solid. You're developing some of that inside-out pass rusher class. Certainly some big, true pass rushers, TBD in this cycle. But you didn't have this type of guy, right? I mean, Will Smith is, 265. Jason Moore, 270 maybe on the high end at best. So inside-out players. This is an interior 0-1 technique, 3 technique at the worst with McDonald, as you said, 300-plus pounds, just a disruptor, a guy who, look, the quickest path from A to B is a straight line, right? So when you line up over the center or one of the guards or in between, and you can wreak havoc with leverage and power and technique along with some effort, you're going to pick up scholarship offers in a hurry, and you're going to fit in just about any defense in the country. And that's why this McDonald recruitment was so down to the wire, all right? A lot of schools, Jay, were confident going into this thing because they really started to prioritize him over the last 12 months or so. Clemson made a late run at him, probably finished second in this recruitment. Michigan was involved. Florida was involved. Georgia was involved. Everybody tried to shoot their shot here with McDonald, but that long-standing relationship with Ohio State was part of the reason why the Buckeyes won out for another elite Georgia recruit. Every single cycle we see them picking and prodding. We talk about Florida a lot, but they do so pretty well in the state of Georgia there on top of it. And look, McDonald he's a game wrecker. I mean, there's really no other way to put it. You know, he's old school. He probably fits a little bit better in the 90s and early 2000s, but clearly, especially in the Big Ten, still very much a need for this enforcer type of interior defensive lineman. But again, he can rush the passer. I mean, I don't want to make it seem like he's a Terrence Cody gap occupier, run stuffer. I mean, he's got a bunch of sacks to his name at a very good program at North Gwinnett High School, just outside of Atlanta. He lives in the backfield, and he does it with quickness just as much as he does it with leverage. There's an awareness to his game that I really like, and the technical aspect has come along plenty in the last year or so as well. He's not just bullying these guys that are a little bit smaller than him in front of him. He's winning with swim moves. He's bound stepping, and he's running over running backs when they try to pick him up and double team. He's a very smart player that starts to shine just as much on tape as much as that pure natural leverage physicality does. That's so easy to see. When you look at the second and third layer of this kid's game, you start to like him a lot more and more, and that's why his recruitment became so crazy here down the stretch, and everybody wanted a piece of him.
John, you mentioned the swim moves, and I watched some clips of him before coming on here with you. The swim move was evident, and it was there, but I noticed that no matter if it was a one-on-one block, which was rare because you can't really – no, but I don't know anybody in high school that could block this guy one-on-one. But if it's a double team coming, he finds a way – to get a straight line to the find a straight line to the ball. And when you're an interior D lineman, that path could be to the outside of where the tight end was. He finds a straight line, immediately reads, reacts, goes to the ball, and he does find a lot of action in the backfield. No matter if it's a one-on-one block or a double team, maybe a triple team, maybe getting chipped by the running back as the running back's coming in, going out for a pass, doesn't matter. He is finding ways to find a straight line to the ball. And I think with him being 3 bills plus, that's huge because you don't want a guy who's taking these big loops around because he can't going. That's just his mind is like, oh, let me loop around. Let me not go straight. He's 300 plus, 6'3". He has different moves, but he finds that straight line to the ball. And I think every coach out there wants that. But Larry Johnson and his track record of success with D linemen ultimately won this out, and I can't wait to see what Larry Johnson does with Kayden McDonald when he's in Columbus.
Casco Garrett comes to mind, right? I mean, just a playmaking interior prospect that he doesn't look like Joey Bosa or these other physical freaks, but man, every time you watched Ohio State play, there's Garrett intercepting the ball, fumble recovery, tackle for loss, 4th down stop. There's a lot of that in this pickup. The ceiling isn't as high. He's not going to change a bunch physically from between now and when he's 21, 22 years old and wrapping up his Buckeye career. But the floor is so darn strong here. Again, not just a road grader, a physical, a smart and physical player simultaneously who's also efficient and aware. So I really love the combination of interior traits that McDonald puts on tape. Again, his floor is higher than his ceiling. He's a guy that you don't need to change a whole lot before you get him involved in the Big Ten. And I think that's why he's not going to be the highest rated commit we talk about or the highest rated defensive lineman they bring in. But when you talk about guys who are going to play early, you think that he's got a better shot to see the field as a teenager compared to some of the other guys on board because he's just so well put together and what he does well is so needed, again, independent of your defensive scheme. Everybody needs something like this for the goal line, for short yardage, or even for early downs in this nature of college football.
I mentioned the straight line to the ball, more of a relentless pursuit type of deal that he has when he's on the field. And you mentioned physically a little bit there. You and I always talk, John, especially with the D linemen, Jason Moore. I remember we talked about him, some of the O linemen, Miles Walker, Austin Sareveld, putting on weight. Well, how much weight will they put on? Offensive linemen, maybe they're 280 in high school, 285. Well, they might come to Columbus and play at 310, 315 at offensive guard. With McDonald, he's 310, 315. And I think Larry Johnson wants more of a one technique now in his tenure, his career, to be heftier, to have that more that beef there. Are you thinking he might be more a guy who plays at 330, 335, stay at 315, or shed 10, 15 pounds once he's in college?
Yeah, it could go either way here. And again, that's why I think the floor is so high, right? Because you're not going to have to change much. I mean, look, if you need to add weight, that's really easy with a guy that's already that big, or even if you need to maintain or drop 5 or 10, it's still very attainable once you get to such a structured program like Ohio State. So yeah, you're not going to have to tweak much with his frame, right? He's 6'2", 6'3". You don't know if he's going to grow much taller. So how he's built proportionally is kind of what he is. You can tweak it and tone it up some, sure. And we expect that from every recruit jumping from high school to college, but there's not much you got to alter here. I think, again, for the responsibilities we expect of that one technique, right? To play the guards, beat the center, pressure the center, and really make the quarterback feel you from an interior perspective and help you leak out to those great pass rushers that Ohio State always has. For that purpose, I mean, he's already right there, and his game reflects that as well. He's a leverage guy with a sprinkle of technique to beat you when you think he's just going to weigh on you. So, yeah, I don't think physically you're going to need to change a whole lot to his game. You'll just enhance some of the strengths that we've talked about once he gets into that strength conditioning and nutritional program.
And, John, I find that as a luxury, especially as a lineman. It seems like every time, and I mentioned this previously, but I feel like every time we come on a commitment, one of the first thoughts in my mind is, oh, he has to put on weight, or maybe he has to cut weight or something along those lines. For you to be able to come in and your coaches and your strength and conditioning, they're just like, we're just going to fine tune you, just to try and cut fat, keep all the mass, maybe keep you at the same weight. That's a luxury because he might feel lighter, his feet might get quicker. He's already quick off the ball, and if he gets quicker off the ball with that one technique, buddy, that's scary for opposing centers and guards. So to me, John, this is a luxury that he might actually play at the current weight that he's at in college. All he has to do, and all he'll be doing, is fine-tuning his skills.
100%. And again, there's really nobody on the commitment list close to Kayden McDonald from a skill set, from a frame standpoint. So I just think, again, you talk about building an elite group, you're trying to balance everything, right? If you've got great corners, let's bring in a safety. If you've got great outside receivers, let's bring in a slot. If you've got a big power back, let's counter with a 3-down back, right? So if you've got pass rushers and inside out guys, let's get that big interior guy, because we know the exterior guys, a lot of those guys still on the board. I'm sure we'll talk about them, but let's hit the interior and make sure that box is checked as well. So as usual, Ohio State does a very good job balancing out their recruits in a given class, and that's why for us at SI, that McDonald pickup elevated them to the number 2 class in the country. I mean, this thing is all but wrapped up, assuming they hit that edge position like we think they do. And depending on how well that goes, maybe there's a shot for number 1, between Ohio State and Alabama. Shocker. I know we talk about it every year. But look, who knows, depending on how well Ohio State closes in this cycle, how far it goes. But independent of that, McDonald provides balance to that defensive line and some variance, which is what you need when you're building a great group.
John, we're getting close to signing day for this 2023 class. And in the pre-show notes, I just said, who do you think could be the next commit? I didn't say what class specifically. In your mind, could be a 2024 kid, 2025 kid, or 2023. I don't know. But who do you think could be the next commitment at Ohio State?
Well, look, 24 is off to a great start with Raiola and these other guys. That class is going to grow, right? You just expect almost every home game to add a junior, but I think most of your audience is here for 23. So that's where my mind went first. And we just talked about it, right? Now you have McDonald on the interior. Who's going to be on the exterior, right? Because you've got the inside and that inside out group checked. Who's going to be that exterior guy, right? Who's first, maybe, right? We talk about the big 3 all the time. And look, as time has gone on here, you could still make the case for Uiagalelei as the most likely between the 3, Damon Wilson, Keon Keeley being the other 2. But there's starting to be a little bit more chatter with Damon Wilson. And I think he's becoming the wild card of the bunch, right? I think with Keeley, we know what we're getting, right? It is Alabama. It is Ohio State with a sprinkle of Florida. I think with Uiagalelei, it's the same big 3. It's Ohio State, USC, and Oregon, with those Pac-12 schools getting the benefit of the doubt of having this recruitment go a little bit longer. I think he knows exactly what he's getting at OSU. With Wilson, At one point, he was like, I need to get to Texas because I hadn't been there. And then he's like, Miami is recruiting me hard and their commits are all over me. And then he started taking visits this fall, and it's like Ohio State and Georgia have started to kind of become the two to focus on. And he took 2 trips to Ohio State, including that official for the Notre Dame game. And really from that point, we're starting to hear a lot more Ohio State buzz. And now, just checked this morning, not a whole lot planned going forward for Damon Wilson, even though he's got a couple of official visits he could potentially take. Nothing really tangibly on the docket as far as I could tell from a quick search this morning. So that tells me this Ohio State-Georgia deal could really become a tipping point for Wilson. So I'm curious to see, with him not having a defined timeline, just how close he might be to making a decision. And maybe he's the next guy to jump on board for the Bucs.
John, we talked about, I believe his name was Jeremiah Smith, a receiver from 2024. And someone in the YouTube comments, when you and I talked the last time about him, they asked if he was going to reclassify to 2023. I hadn't heard anything or seen anything. It could just be a question, maybe hoping that there's a 5th receiver in this recruiting class. Have you heard anything about that?
Talk about luxury. My goodness, that would be a bit absurd. Right? I hadn't heard it. And this is the time of year where those decisions have to come in, right? We've seen, Davie Belfort's a quarterback that was in 25. He's reclassified to 24. That came in this time of year. And we've seen 2 DBs in Florida reclassify from 24 to 23, right? Desmond Ricks at IMG, Antoine Jackson down at Dillard High School. All those decisions came in the last couple of weeks. So this is the time of year where that stuff starts to get a little bit settled. I hadn't heard a lot from Jeremiah Smith's camp. And even so, in his recruitment, which we talked about last week, it's Ohio State and certainly Miami, home versus heart kind of deal. He seems like he's down to those 2, but not done in trying to make the decision. So not only I don't think I've heard a lot about reclassification. I don't think he's close to wrapping up the process, though we think we know the primary contenders with OSU and UM.
I see behind you, happy flip season. It reminds me of Woody Page on your board behind you. Happy flip season. Reminds me of Woody Page when I first started watching Around the Horn. He'd have a board behind him, and every day would be something written different. Do you see anything in the class of 2023 where a guy is currently committed, but Ohio State flips him prior to signing day?
Oh, man. I don't think something tangibly like, hey, I'm like, this is the guy that's on flip watch. But look, Ohio State's going to keep recruiting the South really hard. We mentioned the state of Florida and the state of Georgia where they're always after top guys. They were in it for Caleb Downs. They were in it for Justice Haynes, a bunch of other guys. I'm curious to see how that goes. And then on the flip side, no pun intended, there's some Ohio State commits that I know folks still really want, right? Like Jelani Thurman continues to take visits to other schools. So that could be interesting and potentially affect Ohio State in both ways. All those kids we mentioned are from the state of Georgia. So you never know how it goes. I know, Miami's trying to grab Carnell Tate and Brandon Ennis and Mark Fletcher. I mean, look, it works both ways. Look, it's not going to happen, at least in bulk and in volume. In terms of the Ohio State flips one way or the other, but you absolutely know it's this time of year. That's why it's on the board, right? This is the time of year where that stuff starts to perk up a little bit more. And usually a tell is the visits, right? So I'd keep an eye on Ohio State's home schedule, the recruits that show up late in the season here to Columbus that are committed elsewhere. Those are the guys that you start to say, okay, well, this is interesting, right? Because at this point, as a recruit, you're not taking trips to go see a cool game, right? It's too close to signing day. It's next month for most of these kids. You're not just like, hey, let me go watch a cool game at the Horseshoe. You're like, no, I really need to know if I need to, scratch this Ohio State itch, conversely. So I don't have the greatest list of names for you one way or the other, but Ohio State will be involved in flip season. It's just, if you're an elite school near that number 1 spot in recruiting, you are both trying to poach and trying to avoid being poached simultaneously. And Ohio State's well-versed and experienced in that front, and this cycle will be no different.
We are almost a week away from JT Tuimoloau's monster game, abnormal performance, out-of-body experience he had against Penn State, where he had a pick an interception when he dropped back into coverage, a pick six in the fourth quarter, a strip sack, which he recovered the fumble. He also tipped the pass, which led to Zach Harrison getting an interception. I mean, he had his hands all over the place. He was dominant, tackles for loss, fumble recoveries, touchdown, 6 tackles. I mean, he was just a dog in that game. You mentioned Keon Keeley, Damon Wilson, Mateo Uiagalelei. I knew they were going to come up at some point in the show, didn't know when. And John, I'm thinking about those 3 guys specifically. We're thinking about how that performance alone, one game by JTT, could impact Buckeye recruiting, especially with these 3 guys. How do you think they're viewing that performance that Tuimoloau had a week ago against Penn State?
Well, look, it's the best defensive end performance of the year, probably of the last couple years, right? I mean, I know Will Anderson at Bama's had some crazy games over the last 2 years, but I mean, I think individually in terms of a 1-game sample, how could there be a better game than this, right? This is the equivalent of a quarterback throwing for 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. It's just hard to imagine possibly duplicating something like that. And I think the timing here was important, right? It was a game where, look, Ohio State was good, not great. They didn't bring their best offensive effort to it against Penn State, which always has a good defense. And then the defense of Ohio State took over, which is really what the doctor has ordered for the Bucs in 2022, right? That was the big question mark after last year. How can this defense be better? And the defense went out and sealed this game. And JT obviously individually had the biggest hand or 2 hands in that conversation. So I think this is good timing-wise, not only for Ohio State and how we view them as a current roster, but the future roster. You've got to look. Another feather in the cap for Larry Johnson, just another tangible example beyond Chase Young and the Bosa brothers and all these other great players. Another tangible and current example of these are the kind of guys we want at Ohio State. And all 3 of the ones that we talk about are in that same kind of height, weight, athleticism, positional projection perspective, right? They're all between 6'4" and 6'6", between 230 and 260 pounds. All 3 of these guys, right? They all project at that same exact spot. So they were tuning in, and if they didn't see it live, they saw it on social or the coaching staff reminded them of it as well. I think it's a 1-to-1 ratio of this is what we want you to do here. Look at this one game. We think you can come do that at Ohio State. It's different when it's tangible and when you see it again. We talk about the other great pass rushers that have come through, but when it's happening right now, it's just easier to resonate with and link between a current player and a current recruit. So obviously West Coast wise, JTT's from Seattle. We know Mateo's from SoCal, all the Polynesian ties we talk about. That certainly doesn't hurt in that regard. And then with the 2 Floridians, Wilson and Keeley, athletically right in that ballpark, right? So those are the players that you're selling to the future and say, hey, come keep this thing up when JT's gone and making his own plays on Sundays, right? So it was nice to see him turn the corner, right? He started late at Ohio State, all that stuff. Good to see him continue to turn the corner and have the JTT game, right? I'm assuming that's what your audience is going to call that win over Penn State for years to come.
The flu game, the JTT game, they all go hand in hand. John, I do think, though, not just these kids now, these youngsters now, I don't think JTT is done having I don't think it's going to be his, of course, I don't think he's going to have another game as wild as what he just had with those numbers, those things like that. But I still think, though, with a lesser opponent in Northwestern, a lesser opponent in Indiana, a lesser opponent in Maryland, you mentioned recruiting, guest list. The guest list against Michigan when Ohio State hosts them, I don't think it'll be as wild as a Notre Dame game because that was in better weather. But still, it's Ohio State, Michigan. That's going to be a wild, crazy type of guest list as well for 23, 24, and 2025 recruits, maybe even 2026 with unofficials. Like, hey, right. I'm young. I want to get it. I want to get a jump start at what Ohio State might be or what Ohio State is. That Michigan game, and not just JTT, but the Ohio State team as a whole, that's as big of a game for recruiting as any game Ohio State plays in any college football season.
Right. And if you look at the teams at the very top of the list from a current roster perspective, right? College football playoff rankings, all that stuff just came out. Rivalry wise, Bama Auburn doesn't feel the same this year. Clemson, South Carolina doesn't feel like it's a big deal this year. Who else is near the top? I mean, TCU in that conversation. It's Michigan, Ohio State, right? I mean, these are the two of the top, 5 teams in the country. This is that weekend, rivalry weekend. This is the game. It always is, but comparatively with some of those other schools at the very top, it's a no-brainer if you're looking at all of them. And then you throw in what happened last year and the revenge factor, all that stuff. Really, it just lines up incredibly well for Ohio State and Michigan to both really benefit from that rivalry weekend compared to the other schools that are near the top of the rankings. So, yeah, it'll be a big deal. Ohio State never struggles to get top recruits on campus, and that'll be another one that we kind of marvel at when the time comes.
John, it's fun having you on. I love everything you bring to the table, and I just can't wait to look talk. I look forward to talking to you again, and you never know. Maybe another commitment could happen. Maybe somebody could flip. I don't know. We'll just have some fun stuff to talk about when it comes to Ohio State football recruiting. If you could, John, once again, like always, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter if they're not watching on YouTube. Then also where they can catch all the good stuff you guys are doing about football recruiting over at Sports Illustrated.
Yeah, Twitter's real simple. It's just my name, John Garcia _JR. And yeah, fresh class rankings out on SI.com right now. Ohio State is at number 2 on that list. Heavy hitters at the top, as you would imagine. So, check out the numbers and see how close it might be here down the home stretch. It'll be very fun.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. Send all of your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. JTT's performance was amazing. I knew there was a recruiting angle. We got to get that from John Garcia. Had to talk about Kayden McDonald. And who could be the next Buckeye commitment? Of course, Keon Keeley, Damon Wilson, and Mateo Uiagalelei came back up in the conversation. John Garcia, love having you on. Thanks for coming back on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, Jay. Thanks for having me.